we're launched. Alexia, please introduce yourself.
Okay, hi. My name is Alexia Kemerling, and I'll be presenting with Varonis, and we're going to be talking about how we used iPads and mobile technology to provide captioning for an amateur theater production.
And I'm Varonis. I just retired from Hiram College, and Alexia worked on, and I worked on this great project together. So this is an overview of the sections of our presentation. Each one will be signaled with a transition slide on an orange background, so you have a sense of where we are and how we're moving. If you have questions now, please add them into the question and answer area, the chat area, and then we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So Alexia graduated this spring from Hiram. I retired in February from Hiram and then got called back because of COVID-19. And we both have common ground in universal design for learning. So what is universal design for learning? It is an approach to designing learning environments so that everyone can access all information and complete all activities and engage and interact with others. There are no barriers. When learning environments are not designed with complete accessibility, then there's a greater need for accommodations. If you have designed for complete accessibility, there is no need for accommodations, you know, unless it's something like giving specific students a little extra time to take an exam. So we always encourage faculty to design their courses for accessibility so that they're born accessible, not necessarily having to retrofit them for accessibility after they've already been developed, choosing materials that are not accessible, choosing activities that not all students can complete, choosing methods of communication that might be barriers to some.
So both of these concepts are consistent with the idea of the social political model of disability, which is also sometimes called the minority model of disability. And what this theory suggests is that disability is not an individual problem. It's not the individual's impairment that's causing the disadvantages, but rather it's the way that the world around them is not designed to fit them. So the political, environmental, sometimes attitudinal barriers are what cause the real disadvantages. And this is illustrated by a cartoon we have on the right here, drawn by Dave Lupton. And it shows two members of the press. One is in a wheelchair and one is an able-bodied woman. And she's asking him, "So what's wrong with you, my dear?" Sort of implying, "Why are you in a wheelchair?" And he replies, "Apart from your patronizing attitude and the lack of access, you mean?" And is pointing to the stage, which has stairs and not a ramp. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about that idea and the power of inclusive design. So Elise Roy is a human rights lawyer and also a deaf designer. She sort of popularized this idea in her 2015 TED Talk that when we design for disability, everyone benefits. So it's never just about accommodating one individual, but rather when you make something inclusive, even people who aren't disabled benefit. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. So just within the realm of technology, there's a lot of ways that when we design for disability, it then becomes common practice and everyone uses these technology advances. So I'm just going to go through this slide and give you a few examples. So typewriters were actually originally designed just for blind people. And of course, then everyone started using them and then they evolved into the modern keyboards that we have today. Next, we have a picture of a Gmail inbox. So Vincent Cerf, who is an American developer, recognized a lot of times as the father of the internet, himself is hard of hearing, and he's also married to a deaf woman. And they were both tired of living in the age where the most common form of communication was telephone calls, and so he invented email. And of course, now it's not just deaf and hard of hearing people who use email, we all use it. Next, we have a picture of a woman using a touch screen. Wayne Westerman, he had severe carpal tunnel syndrome, which prevented him from being able to press down onto keyboards or onto a mouse. And so he invented touchscreen technology so it would be easier on his wrists. Eventually, Apple purchased his design and made it into the popular iPhones and iPads that we have today. And lastly, there's a picture of a man texting. Texting was beta tested and popularized by hard of hearing people and by deaf people. So it's fair to assume that we wouldn't have many of these technology advances if we didn't have designers thinking innovatively and creatively about ways besides the norm.
We'll be saying some things now about the Hiram College Tech and Tech program, and specifically its relationship with accessibility. The Tech and Tech initiative was designed to put the same piece of technology in the hand of every student and every faculty member. So it's called, one-to-one, a one-to-one initiative. The idea was that it would be democratizing, that it would not, there would not be divisions between students who had devices that maybe they had been using at home or high school, they could bring them to campus, and students who did not have the possibility of having such a device. This way, everyone had the same technology. There are 4 parts of the Tech and Trek logo. At the top is the mobile device, the iPad, and then I guess heading east is our Trekker, because it was an important part to balance technology with also personal, physical, spiritual, and cognitive, intellectual treks. At the bottom is a light bulb representing innovation. And then on the west side of the logo is the symbol of mindfulness. It was important that when students use technology, they did so mindfully. And part of that is knowing when to put the device down. Accessibility is not part of this. It was not one of the original goals of the Tech and Trek program, but because there are people that are passionate about accessibility and passionate about technology and could see how much the iPads could help support inclusive design and inclusive access, then we started taking advantage of the iPad features that allowed learning to be more inclusive.
So this slide shows a screenshot of the settings menu on an iPad, but it basically looks the same on any Apple device. And what you can see here is that Apple has built in a lot of customizable accessibility features. So for example, you can adjust the text size and the contrast of your screen. There's an option to turn on voiceover, so your screen will read everything that's on it to you. This is helpful for blind people and people with vision impairments. You can also adjust how you use the screen controls. In some cases, hearing aids can connect to Bluetooth. I use this feature a lot, and it's my favorite thing. And they also have predictive text, which is really helpful for alleviating the stress of writing for people with learning disabilities, or just who have anxieties attached to that type of work. And this is true on any smart device. There's also a lot of third-party apps that are available for accessibility. There's so many of them, but this is just a few that we chose to represent. So on the left is the logo for the app Calm Harm, which helps people with anxiety or mental health disorders, or even disabilities like autism. When they're feeling overstimulated, it helps ground them and provide them with coping mechanisms in real time. The app in the middle is called Dyslexia, and you can use this app to import PDFs or other text into the app to help you better be able to read it. And then on the right is a screenshot of the app Otter, which provides live transcription and which we're using at this conference. I discovered this app and started using it in my classes, and then eventually asked Tech and Trek to add it to all students' iPads so it would be fully accessible to people who needed it.
So we are live streaming captions, and they will become part of the recording of this presentation. And the user can decide whether or not to turn those captions on by selecting the Otter button at the top left of the screen.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about disabled college students and the need for increased accessibility. So 15% of the world's population lives with a disability, and a lot of people believe that this makes disabled people the largest minority group in the world. And 19% of college students have a disability, and these estimates come from the World Health Organization and from the US Department of Education, respectively. But despite this growing population, which might actually be bigger than the statistics, a lot of people don't like to self-report on this kind of thing. But despite these large numbers, disabled people still have to face a lot of barriers, both in the public realm, but also on college campuses. So in 2019, the National Center for College Students with Disabilities did a survey where 46 students with disabilities from a range of colleges and universities answered questions about what made their daily campus life difficult. And this table shows the most common answers. So work with the Disability Resources Office can be difficult. People might not even be aware that they can get accommodations in college. In high school and elementary school, all of this is taken care of by the school. The student doesn't really have to do anything. But once you get to college, it becomes your responsibility to send all your medical documents in, get the letter, and then every semester for every class, you yourself have to send that letter to your professor. So this creates a pretty big burden on students, and it can also be stressful when faculty are uninformed, or they don't respond, they don't comply to the letters even after you've submitted them. And there can also be stigma just within peers, negative interaction about disability, and the fact that disabled students sometimes have to manage a lot more than their non-disabled peers. So there's a quote from one of the responses that I'll read here, and it says, "These conversations about access have been going on since the ADA came into place in 1990, and I still can't go into a class trusting that all of my energy is going to be put into being a good student. It's going to be about having to tweak and educate and everything else sometimes. I had to drop 2 classes this semester due to accessibility things." So this kind of illustrates the burden that is placed on students when courses are not designed to be accessible, as Litsa was saying earlier. So a lot of these barriers can lead to outcomes such as lower graduation rates, disabled students feeling less comfortable on campuses than their non-disabled peers. And J. Timothy Dolmage, who wrote a book called Academic Ableism, notes that this isn't just an individual problem, but rather across the United States, disability services offices are often understaffed and underfunded. So at Hiram College specifically, we can see this in the way that our small size can be both a pro and a con. With just around 1,000 students, our faculty and professor to student ratio is pretty small. So that can be a big pro in that disabled students might find it easier to talk to their professors or get help outside of class. But at the same time, our small size sometimes mean that we have less human resources and less financial resources. So for example, this year I discovered that our disability services office at the time did not provide accommodations at campus events that were not for academic credit, even though those events are a big part of the college experience.
We're going to transition now to the real focus of our presentation, which is captioning. It's only one little piece of accessible design, but very useful one. US law says, and this is the Americans with Disabilities Act, that live events need to be captioned to be compliant. In addition, international guidelines, the WCAG for web content accessibility guidelines, say exactly the same thing. You not only have to make captioning available for recorded information, but also for live events, which is really more difficult. So there are two very robust but very expensive solutions for real-time captioning. One is Communication X has real-time translation, or CART, where you have to have a trained captioner using specialized equipment to convert speech to text by using some type of a phonetic shorthand. And then those captions can either be projected on a screen or on a wall, or they can be delivered directly to individuals' devices. Another app or another solution is the GalaPro app, which is specifically for entertainment in big venues. It delivers captions or multilingual subtitles or audio description or amplification directly to a user's mobile device. So Alexia is going to tell you about how she learned about that.
Yeah, so like Lisa said, these services are really great. They're very effective, but of course, they're not always financially accessible to a lot of places. I learned about GalaPro in, I think, the fall of 2017. I went with a group of Hiram folks to a Broadway production, and I noticed in the playbook that they give you that there was a little flyer that said, download the app GalaPro for free live subtitles. And I was just blown away. I had no idea that this was a thing. I never heard of it. And it entirely changed my theater experience. I'd been going to theater productions consistently at Hiram College because my roommate was a theater major and I wanted to support her. But I absolutely could not follow the plays because I had a hard time hearing the dialogue. So I usually had no idea what was happening, and I would just clap when other people were clapping. So it was never a fun experience for me, and I just went to support her. So when I saw that live captioning at theater was possible, I immediately wanted to recreate it at Hiram. But I knew that there were a few criteria that we specifically needed to meet. So our captioning needed to be low cost or free, since the Disability Services Office wouldn't be able to financially help. It needed to be easily adjustable. My first thought was that maybe we could make a pre-recorded video of subtitle slides and just hit play when the play starts. And then my theater major roommate pointed out to me that the timing is never, ever the same in amateur productions. You know, people skip lines, they go faster, they go slower. It's pretty likely the video would get off track very fast. The solution also needed to be easily repeatable, so that it could become a common thing. And it also needed to be discreet enough so that it wouldn't distract other viewers. So projecting it onto just one big screen like CART wouldn't be a viable solution. And we also wanted to make sure that we weren't designing it just for iPads, because even though all Hiram students have iPads, a lot of times members of the community outside of the college come to the performances. And so if they didn't have iPads, they just had like smartphones, it needed to work for that as well. And it was also suggested that we use headsets to help with amplification. But if you have trouble understanding speech or you have total hearing loss, that solution wouldn't work either. So basically, one of my main goals with this project was not only to provide captions, but also to show that accessibility doesn't need to be expensive. Accommodations can be possible if you're just thinking ahead and you take a little time to do it.
All right, so our solution at Hiram College, we've got these iPads. Everybody has iPads. We have a need to develop live captions, and all credit to Alexia. She came up with this idea. We believe it's the first time ever in the world. I couldn't find any indication that anybody else did this. So step 0 basically was coming up with the plan. Alexia?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about my experience with GalaPro and my experience at theaters before I knew there were subtitles for theaters. And so when I decided that I wanted to do this at Hiram, my first idea was, of course, to email the theater department and say, hey, I have a free idea that we can caption your performance. Like, can we do it? And I didn't get a response. So I started going to other places to present the idea. I talked to the Dean of Students and I talked to the Hiram College Diversity Committee. And they both encouraged me to reach out to the theater department again, but this time to CC them so I would have a little more credit to my name. So I did finally get to meet with the theater department in October, and you may want to note that the production was scheduled for November, so we were getting a little close to the deadline already. And the theater department had a few concerns. They didn't know if this would be a violation of their copyright agreement with the owners of the play. And they were also worried that this would be a distraction for other audience members, even though for me, it's distracting when I don't have subtitles because I don't know what's going on, so I can't pay attention. So the theater gave me a copy of their 7-page licensure agreement between them and the rights owners of the play and asked me to look through it. I did go back to my dorm room, get out a highlighter and try to read it, but I'm not a lawyer, so I had a hard time understanding the legal language. So I reached out to someone in Hiram's HR department, and she contacted Disability Rights Ohio for me to see if this was a concern. And DRO told us that because of the ADA, as Lisa established, the college did have the right to caption without extra permissions needed from the company. So I met with the theater again and let them know about the ADA regulations. They were still a little wary and maybe confused about what exactly I was doing. And of course, also they were getting ready for the production in a few weeks, so they didn't really have time to help me. So they basically handed me the script and said, you can copy it in our office, which I did so. It was about 90 plus pages. There was not an automatic feed, so I was just kind of standing there copying pages for a while. And so then I had this gigantic script, this paper script in my hands that I needed to be electronic so that I could carry out my idea of captioning with a mobile device. And I had no idea where to go for here. I reached out to the Disability Services Office, but as I said, they were unable to help. So I knew the library had a scanner, so I kind of headed to the library and I just sat on the steps outside, sort of in defeat, thinking about where could I go next, who's gonna help me with this gigantic project I've accidentally gotten myself into. And so I knew the library had a scanner, and I had known Lisa. She had helped with accommodations in some of my other classes, and I thought I'll just go to her office and see if she has any advice. I didn't expect her to jump into the project right then and there, but that's exactly what she did.
So Alexia appears with this copy of the script, 96 pages. And she came into the library. You see in the image on the left, that's the Tech and Trek desk. There's a bunch of students meeting in a group working on their iPads, because my office is right there. Whenever I see stuff like that happen, I ask them if I can grab a picture of it because that was spontaneous, not staged. And she walked, past the desk, past whoever was there, into my office and said, I've got this script, I don't know what to do with it. So I said, okay, well, let's scan it, let's make it electronic. And then the first copy, I still don't know why, it came out cockeyed, goofy, crooked. And I thought, oh no, please don't don't tell me it's gonna go like this. Don't know what happened, but we immediately tried it again. The second copy came out straight. And so that was all good. It's a PDF file, that's all good. But when you automatically scan like that, the PDF files are not actually text, they are images of text. So there were 96 pictures in this PDF file, nothing that was really interpreted as text. And that's pretty typical of scanning. So if you can't select a word or a sentence or copy or delete anything, then you know you've got a picture. So the next step, step 4, was to run it through Adobe Pro with the optical character recognition tool that Adobe Pro has to turn the pictures of text into text. And if you look at the image on the left, the first sentence, which is part of the stage directions, is highlighted there. I was actually able to do that with the mouse once I had OCR'd the document. So now it's text, which means it could be edited for our purposes. And so then I saved it as a Word file so that it would be easier to edit than as a PDF file. I simply did select all, copy, and then dump it into Word. There's another way to do it. It takes a little bit more processing time when you simply, in Adobe, save as a Word file. That's fine. But either way can introduce some noise. And I want to point out in the image on the left, you can see I've selected the text. So it is, you know, OCR'd, it is text, not an image, but there's also this shadow, which was a crease in the original copy, and that's selected too, as if it were something, which it's not. Also, the heading at the top of every page, stepping out, was selected, although for some reason 29 was not, don't ask me why. So it clearly, when you OCR something, there are going to be some mistakes, there will be some noise that you have to clean up. So step 6 was correcting the problem areas. The area that I showed you on the previous image that had some of that dark line selected in blue as if it were text, this is what it actually created in the copy dump. So that had to be addressed. All of that had to be deleted. And then we had to remove stage directions because clearly they would not be needed for our solution. And then this huge Word document had to be broken into scenes just for ease of manipulation and editing. And that was step 7. Now, before we jump to step 8, we thought, gee, is there an easier way to do this? Instead of turning this script into individual slides, can we simply use Google Slides? Because Google Slides provides automatic captioning, and it's pretty darn good. It's not perfect. And so we gave it a try with the Nearpod app, which was going to be our solution for delivering live captions. And it didn't work. In the teacher mode of Nearpod, the Google automatic transcription appeared below the slide. But in the student version, the automatic captioning did not appear. So that was going to be a futile effort. That's Brittany Jackson, by the way. She's on the planning committee of the Tech and Trek conference, and she's making a presentation here about captioning. And the captions at the bottom of that screen were actually provided by the Google Slides automatic captioning. So at any rate, good idea, but it wasn't going to work for us. Number one, because it didn't appear on the Nearpod app in the student mode. And number 2, because the acoustics in the theater were so bad that, you know, anything that, you know, teacher mode device did not pick up clearly was not going to be made available to the students using Nearpod. So that pushed us to step 8, converting the slides for an import into Nearpod. So the teacher manages delivery. All the students connected to the Nearpod session would see what the teacher was sharing exactly when the teacher was sharing it. The teacher would control the speed of delivery, and the students would be able to view the presentation, but they wouldn't be able to download it. So there would be no issues with copyright. Would anybody own a copy of the script? They wouldn't. They'd just be able to see it. Okay, our first thought was let's try Apple Keynote because we're using iPads. We knew a lot of the students might be using iPhones, but definitely they all have iPads available. And unfortunately, Apple Keynote did not integrate with Nearpod. So that wasn't going to work. We did do the conversion into Keynote as a test, but it didn't work with the Nearpod app. And then we did end up doing it with Microsoft PowerPoint. The design consideration was to have a black background so there wouldn't be too much brightness in a dark theater, and have the white text on top of the black background. And we ended up with a 36-point font, so it would be large enough to see on a phone, but not so large that the teacher would have to keep advancing slides. So this was tested at the dress rehearsal. The conversion hadn't been finished. Most of Act 1 was finished, but there are 2 acts. I was the teacher. Brittany Jackson joined as a student, and it worked. But we also learned that there was a little bit of a lag between the time I pushed to the next slide and the student received the next slide. And I also realized that there had been some minor script changes that needed to be addressed. I'll point out to you, this is the final number. Notice there is nothing around the necks of the actors. This will become important in a moment. So the next day, I consulted with the theater. This was also opening night. So while the director was sewing elastic on the bow ties that had arrived that very day, I was sitting with her copy of the script to correct little edits in the way the performance was actually delivered, and also make additional changes where the copy had included noise. And then when I was done with that, I helped Betsy cut elastic and pin bow ties, and you'll see this is the performance where the actors are actually bow tied. But that's what happens with theater. People are multitasking all the time. So that was a Friday. On Monday, I sat down and wrote a long email saying, hey, this is going to work. Here's what we did. And, we're scheduled to do the actual performance Friday of this week. And then my note in this email was kudos to Alexia for envisioning this innovative solution. It really was. It was brilliant. And as I said before, no one that I could find out about has ever used this solution to caption live theater before, or anything else. This could be used for a speech as well, as long as it's prepared in advance and you know what the script is. You could use iPads and Nearpod to deliver that speech in real time. So step 12 was to organize and publicize. November 6th, the Hiram College Theater sent an email out. Live subtitles will be available upon request. Bring a smartphone or iPad. Have Nearpod fully downloaded before coming to the show. We created a code for the Nearpod session, and that code was shared when people came into the theater. And step 13, of course, was to caption the sold out performance. It was so sold out that I gave up my seat, and a little folding chair was put right next to the stage. I'm there on the extreme left with my iPad. Here we have 2 examples of theater goers using their devices in student mode. I, of course, was in teacher mode. And we had some seats reserved in that specific section for those who would be taking advantage of the Nearpod solution. So next steps, we didn't want to let it die there. We wanted to step up and step out. Alexia?
Sorry, I muted myself. My dogs were barking this morning. So a big part of this project for me, as I mentioned earlier, was not just to caption the theater production, but also to show the community how to begin thinking about accessibility and what can happen and how it can happen when you are thinking about individuals with different needs than your own. So College Relations approached me and asked me to write an essay or a short article about the experience of captioning, why we did it and how we did it, which was a really great way to sort of show the community the process.
And College Relations let Alexia tell the story in her own words, which was truly amazing. They didn't just quote her, she wrote it. So yeah, go ahead. This one's yours.
So these are just the last two paragraphs of the article. So it says, using technology in an innovative way, we've created a streamlined and cost-effective process, ensuring a future for this feature. Captions are on the rise, and small theaters are no exception. And then I try to sort of bring in the idea that, yes, captioning is maybe most useful for individuals with hearing loss or who are deaf. But also in my own experience, whenever I like watch TV or movies with my friends, I always have them turn on the subtitles, and a number of them still use subtitles on their own once I've shown them the feature. A lot of people just get used to it and they like it, because maybe even if you're hearing, you're missing some dialogue too. So I wanted to communicate this idea that accessibility should be embraced and mainstreamed, and that everyone benefits, not just disabled folks.
As a default, I always have the captions on my TV. You never know when some background noise is going to be there or some dialect thing is taking place. And rather than backing it up, what did they say? If I've got the captions on, I know. So after all that, after their initial reluctance, no, we've got copyright issues, no, it's going to be a distraction to others, theater loved it, and they said, we want to caption the next one, which was going to be Angels in America this spring. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the production didn't take place. But we would have been able to skip most of the steps because the script was already available digitally online. So all of that matter of, scanning and converting and we could have skipped that whole thing. And Alexia, do you want to continue?
Sure. So this captioning project was actually a part of a larger movement that I had been leading, which is titled Speak Up for Accessibility. And on the right here is a picture of some of the people that worked with me on this. Brett Bentowski, who is a senior at Hiram this year, is the first on the left. Matt Mitchell in the middle, he graduated in the spring with me. I'm on the right there. And then in front of us is Sierra Nario Redmond, who graduated in 2018. And we also work to develop an event accessibility checklist, which is available on Hiram's website, on the Disability Services page, and also on our student events page. And what it does is it walks you through all of the considerations of an event and which parts you need to be thinking about for accessibility. So things like captioning, things like alternatives for being involved in an interactive event if an individual is physically disabled, things like accommodating allergies, providing space for people to step away if they're feeling overstimulated. It just sort of makes the process easier. And then after this, the Disability Service Office decided to expand their responsibilities to include co-curricular events, which is great because now students know exactly where they can go if they have ideas or concerns like this. It didn't even occur to me until my senior year to ask for an accommodation at an event where I could not participate at all. And then when I decided to do that, I had no idea who I was supposed to talk to. I probably met with 10 different individuals before finding Lisa, who jumped on board to help. So just a reminder of some of the takeaways. You should consider all facets of accessibility when planning anything, whether it's a class or an event. And you should avoid the return on investment mode of thinking. So instead of thinking, how many disabled students do I really have? Do I need to make these changes or will it be fine without it? Just remember that when you're designing for disability, it's usually better for everyone, so you should just do it anyways.
All students have a right to equal participation. The ADA says they have a right to access what's called equivalent information. WCAG that we referenced earlier, the international guidelines use the same term. But it's not just equal information because that's sort of you receive it. It's also, can everyone interact and engage in all activities? That's part of universal design for learning. Technology can be a barrier. when technology does not permit some individuals to complete or interact in particular ways. We love to use technology as a bridge, and the iPads have really allowed us to do that. Gee, this is what you want to do. Let's figure out a way to get it done. And that's exactly what we did with the iPads, using the Nearpod app to caption. So, you know, there was the solution. There are other solutions, Google Slides Live Captions, for example, that we talked about, Mixed Captions, another app, and the Otter app that we're using for this conference to live caption our presentations. So at this point, I'm going to ask for questions. We have a couple minutes left. And I want to see whether, here we go. I'm going to stop sharing. And do we have anything in chat? No. So we can take your questions if you want to unmute your mics or type something. There we go. The evaluation is in the chat room. So it's the same link for everybody. This is session 102. So that's a reminder, please complete. It's a very short evaluation, but can we answer any questions?
I don't know if I have any questions. That was really cool to see.
Great, Jessica, thank you for joining us. You are welcome to get back in touch with us if you want to try a solution like this. And we'd be very excited to find out that somebody else was going to do something like this as well.
No, it's, you know, live events is something I hadn't really thought too much about before in terms of this accessibility. I've, you know, thought about captions for videos and things like that, but, you know, everything that we can do.
Right.
And like you said, it helps everyone. I use subtitles on my TV all the time, so.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Captioning in small theaters is a relatively new thing, probably within the last like 4 or 5 years. And before that, of course, there were ASL interpreters available at specific productions, but not everyone who's deaf or hard of hearing speaks ASL. And that also limited the dates of the events that folks could go to, because often it would just be one interpreted production.
I'm glad you made that point. Exactly. If we had gone with a really expensive solution, then that expense would have been incurred every single night. As it was, we did only provide the captions for one performance, but once the work was done, all you would have needed was one person to use the teacher device. And, you know, except for that person's time, and it could have been a student assistant, there would have been no other expense incurred at all. So it's a really efficient, cost-effective solution.